The military orders are a collection of religious groups that operate under the Neo-Vatican Church as well as the PanOceanian High Command. Each order of knights has a specific task, and its members will fight fervently until their last breath. For example, the Order of the Hospital specializes in high-risk rescue situations. The Order of Santiago specializes in breaching missions and naval warfare. Whereas most PanOceanian units focus solely on marksmanship, the military orders also train their units in close combat, which can give them an edge when defending against CC specialists. The military orders sectorial is a powerhouse of heavy infantry units supported by light infantry units that fill a variety of tertiary roles. Nearly every unit in our roster has the religious skill, which means that you can always count on them to hold their ground when defending a section of the table. Every knight that the military orders has access to is a premier heavy infantry unit with great stats across the board. In order to protect our investment of heavy infantry units, we also have access to some surprisingly solid hackers, as well as relatively easy access to tinbots. In addition, some of the characters that military orders brings to the table are among the top that PanOceania has to offer. If you want to command a force that refuses to back down no matter the odds, military orders may be the sectorial for you. Without further delay, let's get started with the coadjutor Crosiers. The Crosiers are our basic line infantry unit in military orders, and they have a pretty basic stat line, very similar to something like Fusiliers that other Pano sectorials would have. Crosiers are availability total and are relatively cheap compared to some of the tools and weapons that they can bring. For example, there's the really awesome combi rifle with Blitzen and EM mines for only 13 points, and they also have a pretty nifty multispectral visor level 2 Spitfire for only 1 SWC and 22 points. The Blitzen is a disposable weapon that has a really long range band similar to that of an HMG, so it can be really useful for crossing a gap or on ARO late in the game. EM mines can be really devastating against other heavy infantry units, and can also be used to combat fire teams if they've grouped themselves up. Even though an EM mine or a Blitzen will not wound an enemy unit, it will still isolate them, breaking them out of their fire team, and in the case of heavy infantry or tags, it will immobilize them as well. The MSV2 Spitfire is a really great backup attack piece, and can also be used in defense when dealing with smoke throwers or impersonators that like to throw smoke and then jump on you and take out your fire team in close combat. Honorable mentions are the Paramedic, which is a solid specialist pick in any army, especially in Pano, because we've got the high ballistic skill to shoot those paramedic darts into our high fizz heavy infantry units that we have in this sectorial. We also have the relatively cheap multi-sniper rifle for only 18 points and 1.5 SWC. The reason I've placed this unit in the honorable mentions is because, as you'll see later, we have a lot of other units that can join this fire team and become a much more potent ARO piece to head a defensive core fire team around the Crosiers. When building core fire teams, I usually like to build around what I like to call the hybrid core. So I like to include a unit that can be my main ARO piece, and then also something like a Spitfire to act as a active turn killer once that ARO piece dies and we need to move out maybe in the third turn. As you can see at the bottom here, there are many special units that can join these Crosier fire teams, but that's not even all of them, because we have many really useful wildcards in this sectorial as well, which we will all get to in due time. The first of these units that can join a Crosier fire team are the Order Sergeants. Order Sergeants have an ever so slightly boosted stat line compared to the Crosiers. They get an extra point of CC, they get an extra point of willpower, which is good, and they also get 3 BTS, which is very important. Order Sergeants themselves can form a Harris fire team, which can be really useful as a extremely cheap Harris base to put in something like a wild card into it. The profiles of Order Sergeants are split into 2 categories. One is an Order Sergeant and the other is an Escort Sergeant. The important distinction is that all Escort Sergeants come with their own Oxbot. Oxbots are an incredible, expendable, unique unit for Pano that is a synchronized peripheral with the Escort Sergeant that is leading it. Oxbots are great for deployment zone defense and great for suicide attack runs with their flamethrower, or even used as a minesweeper just by detonating mines by running up and taking the hit. Because the Oxbots themselves do not generate orders, you can use them in a really risky or expendable way and not lose the resource of the order that your escort sergeant itself is generating every turn. Because they are a synchronized unit, you can actually shoot someone with the order sergeant and flame someone with the Oxbot at the same time. And they don't have to be the same targets either. This can present your opponent with some really difficult decisions where they have to decide, am I going to dodge and try to not catch on fire from this flamethrower, but also not be able to shoot back? Or do I shoot back at the escort sergeant and take the flame for free? It's worth noting that escort sergeants cannot be in any fire team, and because they have the Oxbot peripheral, they cannot be included in coordinated orders either. I am personally a big fan of the heavy rocket launcher with assault pistol and Oxbot escort sergeant. I think for 19 points and 1.5 SWC, that's a lot of templates that you can use either defensively or offensively, and the assault pistol is a really useful tool for once you get up close where you want to shoot something and flame something at the same time, and that heavy rocket launcher can get you up the field, absolutely. The Escort Sergeant Hacker is another really unique unit where you can double up on deployment zone defense by having a hacker that can spotlight people coming in or even immobilize any heavy infantry that walk into your repeater net, all while still having access to that Oxbot who can flamethrower something that gets too close. The only thing to watch out for is because you are synchronized with your Oxbot, you cannot do something like flame and hack at the same time. They both have to declare the same attack or dodge or something. If you do want to hack with your escort hacker, the Oxbot will just idle. Now that we've covered some of the interesting escort sergeants, let's go back and talk about the regular order sergeants, because they are also very useful. As you can see at the bottom of the profile, order sergeants can join any Crosier fire team, and up to one order sergeant can join a Knight Hospitaller or Teuton Knight fire team, except for the Crusade fire team. We will get to the Crusade fire team later in this video. What this basically means is you can take that 15.1.5 SWC heavy rocket launcher with assault pistol and put that in your Crosier fire team. It's cheaper than that 18-point Crosier multi-sniper rifle and has some extra BTS if it gets hit with something that targets that, and an extra point of willpower in case you have to do something like discover shoot a camo marker, for example. The hacker can be a solid slot into either your Knight Hospitaller or Teuton Knights fire team, because it is a Whip 13 BTS 3 hacker that can help defend them. On their own, they're not particularly amazing, but it's still added defense, and if you combine it with something like a Tinbot, you can really boost their effectiveness. And finally, there is just the basic Order Sergeant with a combi rifle for 13 points. This may seem like a strange pick, but it's still a 13-point unit that can join a fire team of Knights. You are not going to find anything cheaper than that in this sectorial to make your fire teams cheaper so you can fit cooler and better stuff in them. Next up, we have the Knight Commander, the coolest looking model that you hope you'll never have to put on the table. I say that because this is a lieutenant unit with Hollow Mask. Hollow Mask essentially allows you to put any miniature on the table that is the same size and is in your army list, and pretend that he is that unit. So your Knight Commander could pretend the whole game to be maybe a Crosier paramedic, for example. The Knight Commander has a CC level of 18, but he does have Martial Arts level 2, which can bring that up to a 21. He has a ballistic skill of 13, a willpower of 13, 1 armor, and 6 BTS. The Knight Commander has 2 nearly identical profiles, each wielding a combi rifle, light shotgun, pistol, and shock CCW, with the main difference being either a lieutenant profile or a lieutenant profile with +1 lieutenant order. The Knight Commander can join a fire team of Crosiers, which can keep him relatively safe by benefiting from their fire team bonuses. It's definitely nice to have a hidden shotgun in your core fire team, and the BS-13 is pretty nice for when you might use him in the active turn, maybe on turn 3. In general, if you're going to be going for the Knight Commander, I personally recommend that you always go for the Lieutenant +1 order. In military orders, we have some really solid NCO units that can spend Lieutenant orders as if they were their own. And if you're going to be paying a premium for a Lieutenant like this, you should definitely go the slight extra mile to get that +1 order. With a full 15 unit list and a solid NCO in your second pool, you can give that second group 7 orders to work with every turn. As for what to hollow mask him as, there are many options in military orders. You can try to hide him among a bunch of Crosiers in a core fire team, or maybe bluff that you have something you don't, like maybe a MSV2 Crosier or a Black Friar multi-rifle. I've been able to scare away units like Margot and Duroc just because they think that I have an MSV2 unit watching the back of my table, but in reality it was just my lieutenant who they probably wanted to eat. High risk, high reward, and a good poker face. The only thing to keep in mind is that if you do go for that Lieutenant +1 order profile, your opponent will know that even though he's hidden, he is somewhere on the table, because it's our only option for that skill. Next up, we have the Machinist. The Machinist is PanOceania's primary engineer, and as such, each sectorial gets their own specific version of the Machinist that can usually join their fire teams. They are only AVA 1, so if you want to bring a Machinist to support something like a tag, I would probably keep them out of the fire team and give them something like a Palbot to extend their range. But the military order's specific Machinist can join Order Sergeants or Crosier fire teams and bring some different skills and equipment to the table. The MO Machinist is shock immune and religious, and also brings the amazing armor-piercing mines to the table. If you go for an Order Sergeant Harris with an aggressive Santiago Spitfire, for example, wildcarding in, you can bring along this Machinist, which can help keep the Santiago up and running if he happens to get immobilized, and also, once you get to the midfield, start laying out those AP mines to really deter enemy armor. Next up, we've got the Infirmars of St. Lazarus. These units are BS 13 with, again, slightly better armor and BTS than your Crosier. And in military orders, they are wildcard doctors. They can join any fire team in military orders except for that Crusade fire team, and you're only allowed to have 1 per fire team. Every doctor needs their scalpel, and the Infirmars have decided to bring a monofilament CCW. Since they only have CC 20 and no martial arts, you probably don't want to challenge a CC specialist with this sword, but it can lead to a really cinematic and amazing moment when your Infirmar moves up to a tag and slices them straight in half. For those who don't know, monofilament CCWs work a little bit differently because if you get hit with it, it's a straight roll, and if you roll a 12 or less, you are dead. It doesn't matter if you have 3 wounds or 1,000,000 wounds, you will be dead after 1 failed save. If you want a surefire chance to use this monofilament CCW, I recommend using them alongside the Crosier fire team with EM mines, or even a Santiago Knight with EM grenades. Once you've used those EM weapons to immobilize your target, you can waltz up with this St. Lazarus and slice them in two. Other than their monofilament CCW, you have the option of either grabbing a combi rifle or a boarding shotgun, both costing the exact same 25 points. Next up, we've got the PanOceanian Black Friars. Black Friars are a unit that I've always personally really loved, and we have a couple of profiles here that can be really useful in military orders. The 2 Black Friars that I find the most useful are the 2 FTO or Fireteam Option versions. These 2 FTO profiles can join Fireteam cores of Crosiers. First up, we have the Black Friar with multi-rifle, nanopulsar, drop bears, and also a couple extra skills. He's got Discover +3, he has the Albedo equipment, and a biometric visor. If you have found that you go up against impersonators a lot in your local meta, reach for this guy immediately. Not only do biometric visors ignore the penalties for discovering an impersonation marker, but he has that Discover +3 skill to compound on that ability. That means even on his own, he can get up to willpower 19 when trying to discover a enemy impersonator. Albedo essentially treats this Black Friar as if he was in a white noise zone for the entire first turn. This means he can move up the board with relative ease on turn 1 if your opponent is using an MSV unit as their primary ARO piece. And moving him up on his own is not a bad option, because that Discover +3 also works against camo markers. He has a multispectral visor level 2 himself, which allows him to ignore the mimetism when shooting at or discovering camo markers, and once he's gotten to the midfield and dealt with any sort of camo around him, he can set up those drop bears to help defend the area. As someone who does face impersonators quite often in my local meta, this Blackfriar multi-rifle is worth his weight in gold. The other fireteam option Blackfriar we have access to is the heavy rocket launcher with nanopulsar, a multi-pistol, and the Sixth Sense special skill. This Blackfriar is only 25 points and 1.5 SWC, and is a great option to use as your primary ARO piece in a Crosier fireteam. Multispectral visor level 2 means that she's going to constantly be watching the table and preventing your opponent from putting out that easy smoke to allow him to move around the table. And Sixth Sense means that if your opponent has tried to reduce your fireteam bonuses by attacking your other members, she will still be able to ignore surprise attack modifiers on any attack made against her. I personally stay away from the multi-sniper Blackfriar, mainly because he lacks that wow factor that the other two have, but he could possibly be useful if you back him up with something like a Trinitarian sniper. Speaking of Trinitarians, let's talk about some of the all-stars of military orders, the Trinitarian tertiaries. These are possibly the best midfield specialists that we get access to in Pano, and they are 100% exclusive to this sectorial. Trinitarians have a close combat skill of 18, a ballistic skill of 12, and a willpower of 13. For special skills, they have surprise attack -3, camouflage, hidden deployment, mimetism -6, stealth, religious, and infiltration. Thanks to hidden deployment, you can keep them completely safe off the table, hidden on some invisible point on the table, for as long as you need them to be there, or until someone happens to use a sensor in their zone of control. 3 of the 4 profiles that the Trinitarians have access to are forward observers. This makes them extremely valuable as midfield specialists. But that is not all they can do. All of these specialist options come equipped with decharges and a flash pulse. A flash pulse can be absolutely devastating to an opponent who's about to have a really killer attack run on the rest of your army, and you just happen to hit them with that flash and blind them, preventing them from making any attack actions for the rest of the turn. That includes pushing buttons for objectives. Decharges, in addition to being useful for classifieds, can really make your opponent sweat if they choose to go after your Trinitarian in close combat. All of these Trinitarians also come with shock mines. As for other weapons these specialists have access to, there's a SMG profile for only 23 points, a boarding shotgun profile for only 27 points, and a boarding shotgun mine layer profile for 1 SWC and 28 points. Every one of these is absolutely solid, and you should probably try to take at least one in your lists. For me personally, I am a huge fan of the SMG profile for the added benefit of being able to go into suppressive fire and deal out a -6 for your mimetism, a -3 for the cover, and another -3 for being in suppressive fire, which will put your opponent on a -12 before their range bonuses. The boarding shotgun profiles are also really notable, combined with that hidden deployment. If your opponent happens to move a Harris team, or heaven forbid a core fire team, up to the midfield where you've got your hidden deployed boarding shotgun Trinitarian, you can reveal and lay down a shotgun template on the entire group. You definitely might lose your Trinitarian this way, but you might take an entire fire team with you, and that is worth it in my books. Finally, we do have a non-specialist profile that is a multi-sniper rifle. Many Infinity veterans know the potency of having a hidden deployed long-range ARO piece that can choose when to react and take out a key member. If your opponent does not know that the ARO is there, they might make a mistake and move out into view of your hidden deployed sniper on their second move, and you can reveal and get a free shot. Also playing towards a mission. Maybe your opponent is moving up a Harris fire team with a doctor that's really trying to get to the supply box in the middle of the field. You can choose to reveal and take out that key member of the fire team, and if that doctor is not the fire team leader, the leader will have to decide, do I want to shoot for free at your Trinitarian, or does the whole fire team dodge to try to save that doctor's life? This Trinitarian sniper can also be useful to back up, say, your Black Friar with heavy rocket launcher. Maybe your opponent has access to white noise and has blocked the line of fire of your multispectral visor on that Black Friar. Since they've blocked line of fire to your Black Friar, they may move out thinking they're safe, only for you to reveal and see through that white noise, because you do not have a visor. In general, every single one of these profiles is absolutely worthwhile, and they will all do something amazing at some point in your games, I guarantee it. The next incredible skirmisher we have in this army is actually a character named Dart. Dart may not be a specialist, but she's an absolute killer in the midfield. And she also has a very, very important role of being able to hunt enemy hackers and camouflage that may be hackers to make way for the rest of your army to bulldoze the enemy. Dart has a multispectral visor level 1, camouflage with mimetism -3, surprise attack -3, and forward deployment plus 8 inches. She also has shock immunity, and stealth, and no wound incapacitation, and terrain total, and very importantly, climbing plus. Climbing plus is that key skill that amps her up to 11 in my books. This means that she can easily climb up to the buildings and rooftops that enemy hackers, specialists, and camouflage really like to hide on. And thanks to no wound incap and shock immunity, she essentially has a pseudo extra wound that can allow her to face tank a boarding shotgun template that the enemy is using to desperately try to fend you off. Dart has two profiles that are very similar, each for 34 points. You can either grab a SMG with a viral tactical bow and EM grenades, or an SMG with regular tactical bow and shock mines. I personally prefer the viral tactical bow with EM grenades because those both can be really, really nasty AROs if you happen to get caught out of camouflage with Dart. And the viral tactical bow has the added benefit of getting around many of the total immunity units in the game. In addition, if you're running her alongside some Trinitarians, they're already going to be bringing the mines anyway. In general, if you're planning to build a list with a tag in it, for example, I would highly recommend Dart because she just has that ability to get up on rooftops, kill the enemy hackers, destroy the enemy repeaters that could really ruin your day. Next, we've got our first airborne deployment unit in military orders, the Crusader Brethren. At Phys 11, it's not a guarantee that he'll stick the landing if you go for the combat jump, so I personally usually try to go for the parachutist. The Crusader Brethren is an awesome BS 13 and notably has Armor 3 and BTS 3, which is fairly substantial compared to some of the other AD units we have in Pano. There are no specialist profiles for the Crusader Brethren because they are just here to cause havoc. You have the boarding shotgun with D charges, which can be a great option for something like a looting and sabotaging mission. There's a Spitfire profile for 1.5 SWC and 34 points, and my personal favorite is the multi-rifle with light flamethrower for 31 points. I prefer this profile because you get some really great ammo options in the form of AP, shock, and double action. And you also have access to that light flamethrower in case you catch a group of enemies, or if you want to intuitive attack a camo marker. At around 30 points, the Crusader Brethren is competing for a slot that a Trinitarian could also fill, but there are definitely some missions where getting behind enemy lines very quickly can be extremely useful. With that, we are ready to move on to our heavy infantry. Everyone's here for the knights, I'm bringing you the knights. First up, let's talk about the knights that cannot join fire teams. We have the Montessa Order Motorized Knights. Here in Pano, we have the honor of having the first ever in Infinity heavy infantry motorcyclist. The Montessa Biker has CC 23 with martial arts level 2, BS 13 with mimetism -3, willpower 13, armor 4, BTS 6, and 2 wounds. They are also impetuous, so that means they will never gain cover even once dismounting their bike. While mounted, they have a substantial speed of 8-4 movement, and while dismounted it goes down to a normal 4-4 movement. As for notable profiles, my absolute favorite is the boarding shotgun paramedic for 31 points. The sheer amount of classified objectives that this man can complete on his own is amazing, and it makes him almost a must-take for me whenever I'm playing a mission like highly classified. Another notable profile is the Red Fury with Chain Colt for 1.5 SWC and 34 points. When you are an impetuous unit that cannot gain cover, a high burst weapon is going to be really useful for winning the face-to-face against any models that you come into contact with. The Red Fury is a decent weapon for this and has the added benefit of shock ammunition in case you come into contact with any sort of warbands that would like to go dogged when going up against you. The Chain Colt also ensures that you have the ability to template a group of models or just a single model if you need to. The final notable profile is the multi-rifle with Chain Colt for 31 points. This is a really nice one because it's got the versatility of multiple ammo types, either AP, shock, or double action. Both the multi-rifle and the Red Fury can go into suppressive fire, which can be really useful combined with your mimetism and can help mitigate the fact that you cannot gain cover. Our next unlinkable knight is the Equestrian Order of the Knights of the Holy Sepulchre. This unit is an absolute tank. It's CC 22, BS 14, Phys 13, Whip 13, Armor 5, BTS 9, and 2 wounds. It is also not the normal size 2 of all the other units. This is a size 5 heavy infantry. The Knight of the Holy Sepulchre is basically a miniature tag with BS attack plus 1 damage, CC attack plus 1 damage, surprise attack minus 3, natural born warrior, stealth, and oh so importantly, the veteran skill. Veteran combined with BTS 9 means that the Knight of the Holy Sepulchre is nearly unhackable. Thanks to the veteran special skill, they ignore the effects of isolation, so Oblivion does not work on them. Thanks to BTS 9, they are shrugging the immobilized effect from Carbonite on a 5+, and if you choose to run an Evo hacker to place Fairy Dust on all of your HI, he can shrug that immobilized effect on anything that is not a 1. The Knight of the Holy Sepulchre also comes equipped with a holo projector piece of equipment, which allows you to place 2 extra markers that are holo echoes that mask which one of the 3 is the true Knight of the Holy Sepulchre. You can use this offensively with that surprise attack minus 3 to get a surprise shot on someone, and you can also use it defensively. The holo echoes can essentially keep your opponent guessing on which one is the true knight. Also, if you end your turn out of line of sight of any enemy model, then during the states phase, you will regain 2 holo echo markers in base to base with your model. You can choose which of those 3 is the true knight. So essentially, you get 1.5-ish inches of free movement during the states phase. A really popular trick is to end your movement just out of line of fire of a corner that you would like to be watching on ARO. You can then spend an order to put your knight into suppressive fire, and once the states phase comes around, your holo echoes regenerate, and you can use this act to essentially move 1.5-ish inches to the right or left, and now be watching that alleyway in suppressive fire. This allows you to get past the ARO that your opponent may have had if you tried to end your turn in line of sight and then go into suppressive fire. As for profiles, we've got 2 main loadouts. You can either have a multi-marksman rifle with +1 burst, or an AP heavy machine gun. The multi-marksman rifle has a chain of command profile for 53 points that is really notable because it is the only chain of command we have in military orders. The chain of command profile is also a specialist, so you can move into the midfield and start playing objectives. The AP heavy machine gun is an NCO. This is an example of a great unit to pair up with that Knight Commander with +1 Lieutenant Order. NCO allows this unit to use the Lieutenant Orders as if it were his own. A damage 16 AP heavy machine gun for only 1 SWC and 56 points is kind of incredible, and it is a great addition to the Military Orders roster. Our next incredible unit is the Sacred Military Order of Teutonic Knights. These knights are a speedy 6-2 move, CC 22, BS 13, Phys 14, willpower 13, armor 3, BTS 3 to wound heavy infantry models. They have martial arts level 2, dodge plus 3 and dodge plus 1 inch, jungle terrain, and can form either a fireteam core or fireteam Harris. Teutonic Knights are also impetuous, but while in a fireteam, you ignore the effects of impetuous. These knights are so cheap and so amazing. Their dodge special skills means that they are dodging 3 inches on 17s. Notable profiles are the light shotgun Panzerfaust for 19 points. For an extra point, you can grab a Tinbot with Firewall -3. There's also the Specialist Operative with Submachine Gun and Panzerfaust for 21 points. There's the NCO Spitfire for 1.5 SWC and 31 points. And the Lieutenant option for only 19 points, also carrying a light shotgun and Panzerfaust. Teutonic Knights really want to be aggressive and running forward into the enemy. So they are actually very viable if you want to just run them as their 19 or 20 point profiles on their own, running around just being warbands. But if you want to rein them in and get tactical, you can use the NCO Spitfire as such an amazing point man for a Harris of Teuton Knights. I have very often run the Spitfire NCO with the Tinbot Panzerfaust light shotgun and maybe a Specialist Operative with Submachine Gun and Panzerfaust. They're just so fast that they make the ideal, cheap, hit and run or Alpha Strike Harris. And even if you get stuck in the midfield or caught on the other side of the table with no fireteam bonuses, they've got the dodge skills and they've got the Panzerfaust to cause absolute havoc even when it's not your turn. If you want to get some extra movement out of your Teuton Harris on turn 1, you can do a trick that many like to call angry deployment. It's kind of like forward deployment, but utilizing those impetuous orders. Essentially, you deploy the Teutons, but don't assign them a Harris fireteam marker. In the impetuous phase, you allow each of them to run forward and then spend a command token to form the fireteam Harris. This can get you up to 9 inches of extra movement if you move and then successfully dodge. Another thing to keep in mind with the Teutonic Knights is that you can use their Panzerfausts in a coordinated order. Whenever my Teuton Harris is stuck in a spot where there's a really powerful ARO staring them down, sometimes I'll spend a command token and a regular order and break the fire team to perform a coordinated order. The enemy will only be able to react to one of your models, and if one of those Panzerfausts hits its mark, it's basically over for that ARO piece. The 19-point lieutenant profile is very notable because it is the cheapest lieutenant we get in military orders. But unless you have something like Chain of Command, I would not recommend sending your lieutenant out with that Alpha Strike Harris. If you're going to run the lieutenant, I would suggest keeping him back. He's got the light shotgun to protect himself. He's got the dodge skills to protect himself. He's a solid pick. If you do use the NCO Spitfire with the Knight Commander +1 lieutenant order, just keep in mind that once you lose your NCO, those 2 lieutenant orders might not be as useful. So I've actually made some lists where I use this NCO Spitfire and also the APHMG NCO Knight of the Holy Sepulchre in the same list. That way, if one goes down, you always make sure you're going to be able to use those 2 lieutenant orders, hopefully throughout the whole game. Now, the biggest hurdle you'll have to get over with these Teutonic Knights is that they do not have stealth. So you're not going to be able to just walk silently through repeater networks in the middle of the table. This is why that Tinbot with the Firewall -3 is really useful, and also why bringing along either an Order Sergeant hacker or, as we'll talk about later, maybe a Knight of Justice hacker in this Harris team can be really useful. You can also rely on Dart or the Trinitarians to help get rid of those repeaters and pave the way for your Teutons to go wild. Speaking of Knights of Justice, let's go over them next. The Knights of Justice are just as fast as the Teutonic Knights, but they bring BS 14, Armor 5, and BTS 9. They can only form fireteam duos on their own, but very importantly, they are a wildcard trooper here in military orders. This means that you can bring a Knight of Justice with tons of armor and a really great ballistic skill as your point man in something as cheap as a Crosier fireteam. Every single profile on this list is great. You've got a missile launcher for 46 points and 1.5 SWC. There's a Spitfire for 47 points. There's a hacker with hacking device and decharges for only 46 points and 0.5 SWC. There's also a forward observer with a flash pulse, decharges, combi, and 43 points. You can also choose to bring the Knight of Justice as your lieutenant for no extra cost. And finally, for only 3 points more and 0.5 SWC less, you can upgrade your Knight of Justice Spitfire to have forward deployment plus 4 inches. The Knight of Justice missile launcher is an absolute tank and can really be potent as the main ARO piece of your Crosier fire team, or any fire team for that matter. These are wildcards, so they can join even your Knight fire teams. If you combine the Knight of Justice hacker with the Tinbot from the Teutonic Knights, for example, that BTS 9 suddenly becomes effectively a BTS 12 versus hacking attacks. While they aren't necessarily immune to some hacking attacks like the veteran on the Knight of the Holy Sepulchre, the Knight of Justice's BTS can absolutely tank some hits from an enemy hacker. And killer hackers can basically forget about trying to killer hack a BTS 12 Knight. The hacker, the forward observer, and the forward deployment versions of the Knight of Justice also come with decharges, which are essentially a disposable 3 AP explosive close combat weapon if you don't need them for classified objectives. The other special note to make is that a Knight Hospitaller can join a fireteam duo with a Knight of Justice. So you could either make a duo where the Knight of Justice is the point man with that Spitfire, and then bring along a Hospitaller Doctor, or alternatively, you could go for a Hospitaller HMG along with maybe a Knight of Justice Hacker. Another really potent wildcard in this faction, and my personal favorite Knight, is the Knight of Santiago. Knights of Santiago bring nearly everything you would want in a Knight stat line, and also some incredible equipment. All Knights of Santiago are equipped with a 360 visor, which means that they have 360 line of fire. This allows them to always have an eye on the back of their fire team and prevent enemy models from sneaking up behind them. The Knights of Santiago do have the Frenzy skill, which is reducing their cost. This essentially means that if the Knight of Santiago is not in a fire team and they are able to successfully wound something, they will become impetuous at the end of the turn. Most of the time, these Santiago Knights will be in your fire teams because of that really amazing wildcard status, but there is one profile in particular that is very likely to activate this skill, and that is the Knight of Santiago with Combat Jump, Hacker, and Killer Hacking Device. At 45 points, it is the most expensive airborne deployment troop we have in Pano, and it does not have the Parachutist skill. This means that if you're going to play with this model, you're going to have to roll for him to land on the table. He is Phys 13, so there's a decent chance he will land, and you can boost that by bringing an Evo Hacker Mulebot and running the Controlled Jump program. Once this Knight lands, however, he is an absolute terror. He's got a Killer Hacking Device, a Boarding Shotgun, decharges, and shock mines, and that combination is not something you want to have running around in your deployment zone. The Killer Hacking Device, in addition to protecting this Knight of Santiago from enemy hackers that he might encounter in the enemy deployment zone, also allows him to cyber mask, which allows him to gain a impersonation state to waltz right past enemy mines and maneuver to the perfect position to do the most damage. Just keep in mind that once you activate Frenzy and you become impetuous, you cannot be in the impersonation state. So after you kill something, you're not going to be able to go hide as an impersonation marker, unfortunately. Moving on to the other profiles that are able to join a fire team, we essentially have 2 loadouts. There's the Spitfire with Nanopulsar, EM grenades, decharges, and is also a specialist operative. And there's also a loadout that is a Killer Hacker with Combi Rifle, Nanopulsar, decharges, and a Tinbot with Firewall -3. The Knight of Santiago Killer Hacker is probably one of my most used units in fire teams. Being able to bring that Tinbot with Firewall -3 into any of the other heavy infantry fire teams is so useful. And it's a perfect package because your Knight of Santiago is there to help attack enemy hackers as well. The only thing to be careful of is if you combine him in a fire team with another regular hacker, they will not be able to both hack at the same time in ARO. because in order to hack an ARO, you would have to have both of them use the same programs, at least if you want to preserve the fireteam integrity. You could always choose to have one of the hackers break out of the fireteam so that they can both ARO with different hacking programs. Going back to the Spitfire Specialist Operative Santiago, this is another one of my favorite pieces in the game. Having the ability to use a high burst weapon with Specialist Operative means you're not compromising for anything, and those EM grenades in the right moment can mean all the difference. This Knight of Santiago Spitfire can also be your lieutenant and get a massive 1.5 SWC discount for this weapon loadout. Again, I say this is the kind of lieutenant, but if you manage to keep him alive until turn 3, he could win the whole game on his own. He can fight his way to the midfield, he can press all the buttons you need to get the mission done, and he's got plenty of tools to get past most things that he might encounter on the way. This is yet another knight that does have the fireteam duo skill, so if you want to create 2 Knights of Santiago into a duo, that's great. If you want to bring in another wild card like the Knight of Justice, that's also great. Next we can talk about the Hospitaller Knights. Hospitaller Knights are kind of like the basic knights. They don't have a lot of the bells and whistles or special equipment or things that the other knights have, but what they have is good, and they're definitely a solid pick. This is another knight that has the Frenzy skill, which does make them a little bit cheaper, but for the most part you're going to want to keep them all in a fire team together so that you can ignore that special skill. Hospitaller Knights have the ability to create a fireteam duo, a fireteam Harris, or a fireteam core. One of the best things about the Hospitallers is that they have access to 2 doctor profiles. You can either grab the combi rifle for 33 points, or the multi-rifle for a little bit more for 35 points. If you are going to create a fireteam with Hospitaller Knights, I implore you to grab one of the doctors because they're the reason to take Hospitaller Knights, honestly. I think running them as a Harris makes more sense points-wise, or even running something like a duo of a Hospitaller HMG with a Hospitaller Doctor, just as a little duo running around, killing things and staying together so that they don't activate their frenzy. If you don't want to run the Teutonic Knight Lieutenant, and you don't want to run the Crosier Fire Team with the Knight Commander, the next cheapest lieutenant in military orders is going to be this Hospitaller Lieutenant with multi-rifle. There's also a fairly unique profile here at the bottom that is a forward deployment plus 8 inches with boarding shotgun and decharges. I'm definitely interested in trying out something crazy like bringing 4 of the Knight Hospitallers with forward deployment plus 8 inches and then bringing the forward deployment plus 4-inch Knight of Justice, for example. There are glaring weaknesses in that fire team, notably not having any sort of specialist inside, but I think it would be really fun regardless. I think something more reasonable could be to take that Knight Hospitaller forward deployment plus 8-inch and maybe just one of them along with that Knight of Justice plus 4-inch, and using them as maybe a bit of an Alpha Strike duo that can run up and cause as much problems as possible. If you want to run a full core of these guys, you're going to end up running out of points pretty quick. But if you want to run out of points even faster, you can go to the Crusade Fire Team. So the Crusade Fire Team is something I've been talking about throughout the video, mainly as this cannot join the Crusade Fire Team, but let's go ahead and talk through it right now. Essentially, the Crusade Fire Team is a way to get Joan of Arc into your Knight Hospitaller core fire team. Essentially, the rule is in place so that the only way to get Joan into this core fire team is only if you have Knights of Hospitaller, other wildcard knights that are allowed to join, and other characters that are also allowed to join. It might seem a bit complicated, but you do get used to it. Now let's talk about some characters. First up, let's talk about Father Officer Gabriel de Fersen. De Fersen is a Hospitaller Knight with better willpower and an awesome hacking device. De Fersen has a regular hacking device with the upgrade Trinity. In addition to being a solid religious reference, this is a hacker that is perfect to go alongside that Knight of Santiago killer hacking device. Rather than having to break out of the fire team if the Knight of Santiago needs to hack a enemy hacker, they can both team up together and Trinity them back at the same time. Deferzen also has a higher level of martial arts compared to normal Hospitaller Knights, as well as a special Templar close combat weapon, which is armor piercing and shock. He also brings a unique weapon that none of the other Hospitaller Knights have in the form of a Spitfire. Both profiles of Deferzen are the same cost at 1.5 SWC and 51 points, with the only difference being, do you want him to be your lieutenant or not? I think that with the right setup, he could be a solid lieutenant option because he is bringing that willpower 14 to help you get the edge to win that role at the very beginning of the game. You just need to take extra care and make sure that you are building your list to support a hacker lieutenant. For fireteam purposes, Deferzen straight up counts as a Knight Hospitaller. Unfortunately, he does not have any of the skills like Fireteam Duo or Fireteam Harris, so in order to actually form those fireteams, you will need to have one other Hospitaller there to bring those skills. But that's not too much to ask because you could just bring the Hospitaller Doctor, and you've got a great package there. Next up, we have the star of PanOceania herself, Joan of Arc. First up, we're going to talk about her version 1 of her armor. Joan of Arc has the highest ballistic skill in all of PanOceania at ballistic skill 15. She also has a phys of 15, willpower 15, armor 5, and BTS 6. In addition to her 2 wounds, she also has no wound incapacitation, effectively making her 3-ish wounds. This version also has BS attack +1 damage, effectively making her multi-rifle damage 14, and her nanopulsar also damage 14. The biggest deal here is her inspiring leadership. If Joan is your lieutenant, she will activate this special skill, and every unit in your list that was irregular will now become regular, and every unit in your list will gain the Courage special skill. In addition to these benefits, Joan can use her lieutenant order as a free coordinated order. You do not have to spend a regular order, and you do not have to spend a command token either. It's for these reasons that I actually prefer to keep Joan outside of the fire team, not go for the Crusade, because that command token is so useful in being able to reposition units, or put multiple units in suppressive fire, or even re-camo all of your Trinitarians. That kind of utility is just very difficult to pass up for me. Now, if you are using the Crusade fire team, you could always spend the lieutenant order and break that fire team, in order to reposition 4 of your members to get a better spot, and then of course spend a normal command token to reform. It's not useless in the Crusade fire team, but I just like having Joan running off on her own and really helping the rest of the list. Now it is worth mentioning that the Crusade fire team does say that it can be up to 4 Knights Hospitallers and wildcards allowed. So you don't necessarily have to make the full 5-man core fire team. I think you could make a really decent 3-man Crusade fire team. It's technically a core, but you're not going for all 5 members. And then you can run a Harris team, so then you've got 2 3-man fire teams that are really mobile and moving around and doing things. The last thing to mention about Joan of Arc V1 is that when you bring her as your lieutenant, instead of costing you SWC, she actually has a +1 SWC. So that means in a normal 300-point list, you can bring 7 SWC. If you want a Joan of Arc that leads more from the front, you can go for Joan of Arc V2, Mobility Armor. In this form, Joan of Arc gains 6-2 movement, loses 1 point of Phys, and loses 2 points of armor. So she's down to armor 3. That said, the best thing about Joan is that she's so good at shooting that hopefully you won't ever have to use that armor. But other than those stat changes, she also gains +2 inch to her dodge and terrain total, which can be really useful depending on the board you're on and if you're going up against a faction that has dazers, for example. This Joan of Arc leaves her multi-rifle at home and opts for a more direct Spitfire loadout. In addition, instead of gaining 1 SWC when you bring Joan as your lieutenant here, she does cost 1 SWC, but that's more than worth it when it's a Spitfire on a BS-15 model. This is probably the Joan I would personally run if I was to run that Crusade Fire team, because this one is just much more aggressive. It is worth pointing out that both versions of Joan are very capable in close combat, and both are packing an amazing explosive close combat weapon. Since we're finished talking about Joan, I do want to quickly mention 2 units that might not catch your eye when you first look at the roster, but because of Joan's inspiring leadership, they become really valuable units if you want to take some really powerful pieces in your list. And those units are the War Corps for 3 points and the Tech Bee for 5 points. Both of these units are irregular units that are very cheap, but with Joan's inspiring leadership, they become very, very cheap regular orders. I'm not going to delve into these too much, but I would recommend always going for the 360 visor on the War Corps. And the Tech Bee is really great because she's a specialist operative. She does actually have a pistol, so she can kill something potentially. And that gizmo kit could help maybe repair a bot or something. Both of these units are not necessarily going to kill the enemy, but they might slow them down with their flash pulses, and their main job is to just be there and be 8 points of 2 regular orders. Moving on to our next character, we have one of my favorite characters in Infinity based on backstory alone. It's Indigo Brother Constantinos. Constantinos has regular 4-4 movement, BS 12, Phys 12, Whip 13, Armor 2, but BTS 0. He does have MSV 2 and Mimetism -3, which is a really great combo. He's also a specialist operative, which is always a nice skill to have. Constantinos has 2 profiles that operate very differently. The first is the FTO profile, which is a combi rifle with D charges and an assault pistol with a shock CCW for 24 points. This FTO profile is actually a wild card in this sectorial. When I bring Constantinos, I'm usually going to go for this profile. Because he is a wild card, and he is cheaper than your average knight, you can use him to bring down the cost of your heavy infantry fire teams while also giving them access to multispectral visor level 2, which will help them to see through smoke and also discover camo markers. Constantinos is notably the only non-heavy infantry unit that is allowed inside that Crusade fire team. The other profile is not able to join a fire team, and instead trades that for the infiltration skill. It's an additional 4 points for 28 points. This is notably the same cost as one of the Trinitarians with boarding shotgun. Because Constantinos does not have anything like camouflage to protect him in the midfield, I really think that the fire team option is the way to go. Alright, to finish up our military orders characters, we'll go over our most recent addition, Padre Inquisitor Mendoza. This guy is expensive, but also absolutely insane on the tabletop. He has a really solid knight stat line with CC 22, BS 14, Phys 13, Whip 13, Armor 4, and BTS 6. Very similar to our Hospitaller Knights, but his skills are where everything goes crazy. He has Martial Arts level 2, Berserk +3, Dodge +3, Dodge +1 inch, Mimetism -6, and here's the kicker, CC attack continuous damage, and BS attack continuous damage. That's right, this guy's sword attacks and shooting attacks both do fire damage. Mendoza has 2 profiles, both of them having the forward deployment +8 inches. And you'll notice they had to put that on the name of each profile because this guy has so many skills, they ran out of room. So, you can bring him with a heavy shotgun and grenades, and remember, those grenades are also fire, for 55 points, or alternatively, the multi-rifle with +1 damage and grenades for 57 points. So that multi-rifle is damage 14, and you can do armor piercing. So that's armor piercing continuous damage, damage 14. Each of these profiles is really good at specific things. I think the heavy shotgun is really amazing at taking over objective rooms because you have that option of tossing grenades or laying the shotgun template to hit multiple models with your continuous damage. And of course, when you know that everyone in that room is going to be within 8 inches, it's go time for that shotgun. The multi-rifle is actually really interesting because in addition to being a great attack piece that can shoot up to 16 inches, it can go into suppressive fire. And of course, this guy is Mimetism -6, so just like we were talking about with the Trinitarians, he can basically impose a -12 to someone with this crazy gun. This multi-rifle profile is a solid candidate for if you go second and you want to spend a command token to place him into suppressive fire before the game starts. Depending on your positioning, he can really lock down a corridor up to 24 inches and be relatively safe the whole time. Whenever you find a situation that Mendoza needs to cross a gap and he's out of range for his guns, that's where that dodge +3 really comes in handy. It allows him to dodge on 16s. That plus his mimetism -6 should keep him safe from most things that don't have MSV. Another very important thing to note here is that similar to Teutonic Knights, Mendoza does not have stealth, so make sure you're bringing someone like Dart or some Trinitarians to help screen the midfield for him, because you would never want to spend 57 points on an awesome heavy infantry guy and just have him immobilized on the first turn. Mendoza is an amazing profile that has done wonders for me, but you really do have to watch his back so that he has a path to victory. But once you get this guy up close, it's over for the enemy. And that's it for all of our characters in military orders. Before we move on to the tags, I want to make special note of a couple of remotes that are especially useful in military orders. First up, we've got the ever amazing Bulleteer arm bot with mimetism -6 and BS12. These are the remotes that every other faction wishes they had, and in military orders, we get the option to fireteam duo them. Combined with all of our amazing wild cards, you can make some killer combinations. The Bulleteer itself has a repeater on it, so you can combine it with some of our hackers to increase their hacking network. One of my favorites is to run the Knight of Justice hacker in this duo with the Bulleteer Spitfire. They are both wicked fast with 6 inches as their first move, and you can do something like move the Bulleteer within 8 inches of an enemy tag, and then hack through the repeater of your Bulleteer to try to possess the tag. Alternatively, you could run the Knight of Justice Spitfire as your point man, and have the Bulleteer heavy shotgun running around with her to help watch corners and also provide that repeater so your other hackers can help defend that Knight of Justice. And the final little duo that I think is kind of cool is using this Bulleteer Spitfire along with Constantinos, because he is a wild card and he is a specialist, and you kind of get the best of both worlds, where you get the mimetism -6 on the Bulleteer and the MSV2 on Constantinos. In addition, Constantinos' assault pistol is really great within 8 inches, whereas the Spitfire has a 0 range in that range band. And the other rem I wanted to mention real quick is the Peacemaker armbots. Because we do have some pretty decent hackers in military orders, you can build a list that utilizes the fact that Peacemakers are forward deployment +8, repeaters with expendable Oxbots, and I really like the 20-point heavy shotgun profile. It's a solid way to defend the midfield, it's a solid way to project your hacking presence from turn 1, and once again, you can use those Oxbots as sacrificial lambs to try and take out some sort of enemy repeater or an enemy skirmisher and not have anything bad happen to your order pool. They're AVA too, so you can have one on each side of the table. And next, we're moving on to the tags. First up, we've got the Seraph. Of the 2 tags we have in military orders, the Seraph is rightfully the better one in close combat. It has a CC stat of 23 with martial arts level 1 and an explosive close combat weapon. As you can see, the Seraph has those big wings on its back, and it uses those to super jump. So it can use that to jump onto pieces of terrain, and if you're willing to do the long skill jump, you can move 10 inches with that jump. There's 2 profiles. One has a Spitfire with a nanopulsar and the Oxbot, which also has super jump, and also an HMG profile with a nanopulsar with +1 burst, but no Oxbot. The Spitfire is definitely the option you want to go for if you want to go really up close and get in people's faces, because that Oxbot is so useful for making those big trades. I personally think that the HMG is also pretty fun to use. If I'm running the Seraph with Joan, I'm probably going to go for that HMG profile just because it can participate in her coordinated orders. Also, just having that nanopulsar with +1 burst and +1 damage is just super nice. And finally, we have the Tikbalong tag, arguably one of the best tags that we have in PanO, and it's even better here in military orders. The Tikbalong of Montessa trades the shock mines for an AP heavy machine gun. For only 68 points and 1.5 SWC, you get a Ballistic Skill 15 tag with Mimetism -3 and Climbing Plus. Climbing Plus is probably the best movement skill in the entire game, and can really allow your Teak Belong to get some nasty angles on your opponents. The one thing that Military Orders has very few of is long-range HMG type weapons, and having an AP HMG here on the Teak Belong is great. So if you bring a Teak Belong with AP HMG, you can use that to clear the field so that your other units, like Mendoza, like the Teutons, can move up without having to worry about long-range AROs. And since both the Seraph and the Teak Belong have tactical awareness, that just increases the amount of orders that you can use on any given turn. If you just consider, you could have the Knight Commander +1 Lieutenant Order, you could have an NCO, and you can have a Teak Belong in the same list. So that's a normally 15 order list that now, in a combination of the Lieutenant Orders and Tactical Awareness, you've brought up to 18 orders. Bringing a tag in Military Orders is a totally viable way to play. We've got solid hackers, we've got great midfield presence, and all of these lead to a really strong faction that can field these tags along with some other great stuff. And with that, I think that's going to be the end of this video. I hope you all enjoyed it. I am a big fan of Military Orders. I've been playing them since day one of me playing Infinity. They were my first faction. Over the years, there have been many big changes and reworks, and I honestly think that Military Orders might be the strongest now than it ever has been. I hope you all have enjoyed this overview, and I hope that you will continue to watch the rest of our videos on the channel. I will have a Military Order Army Builder briefing video in the description of this video, and we have plenty of other content coming your way. Let me know down in the comments if I missed anything, and I hope you all have a great day.